everyone, I hope you're all well. I have finally found a moment to record the other assignment videos for HSP101. This one is about Assessment Task 2, the reflective case study. Now, as you can see from my slides here, I still like those corny, daggy little graphics to try and demonstrate the types of things that you need to do when you're doing these assessment tasks. Now, first of all, you need to reflect or think about a particular emergency, disaster, catastrophe, whatever situation that you have been personally impacted by, or that someone close to you has been, so that you can talk about their experience in that respect. After you've figured out what to focus on, which shouldn't be too hard because we have actually done this already in the discussion board a little bit, then pop online into the library through the databases and so forth to find some research literature focused on that specific type of emergency or disaster or whatever it might be. After you've done that and you've read through your research literature, you know about what your case study is going to be, then you need to do analysis. This is where we take our research literature and our case study that we're focusing on and we link them together. Now, the best way to do this is to just think about, what went wrong, what went well, those types of things, and focus on those as your analytical points. And once you've done that, of course, you sit and type it all up. It's very simple. Hopefully, it's very simple. So as you know, it's due end of Module 10, which is Friday the 26th of May, and you have all the way up until midnight of that Friday to upload it to the Milo site. It's 1,500 words, and that excludes your reference list, and it's weighted at 40% of your overall grade. What I want you to do is to reflect on your own experiences of emergency management situations. Now, this can be something that's related to work. It can be something that you've personally been impacted by in the past. It's totally up to you. You need to choose a case study of an emergency management event that you've been connected with in some way, and this can be from anywhere in the world. Then you need to critically reflect in writing about your experience of this event and discuss the management approach taken in the case study. So when we're talking about the management approach, we're not talking about necessarily you having an understanding of the operational processes of emergency management, all right? I understand that there's a lot of people that don't have that type of experience at this particular point. So effectively, you're looking back on what happened in that particular circumstance and how the responders, for example, or the social support services, interacted with you in that circumstance. I hope that makes that a little bit clearer. So I like to give a few little steps, even though it's a bit corny, really. So this is the way that I've broken it down. Thinking of a case study that you or somebody else has been involved in. Find some literature related to your reflective case. What does it say about your type of emergency? All of those types of things. Then you need to analyse your reflective case study. What went wrong and what did they do well, for instance? You might want to focus on each of those, or depending on how many words you use up, you might be able to pick 3 points. Pick 2 to 3 main points and make links in your paragraphs between parts of your case study that you're talking about and your research literature, most importantly. So what does best practice tell us in relation to the type of emergency or disaster that you're discussing? And how then does that relate back? How do you know, for example, that your experience wasn't best practice? What does the research tell us about that stuff? So once you've done that, you need to write up your reflective case study as a mini essay in a Word document, including a reference list. And remember that you need at least 1 to 2 references per paragraph in any essay. That's my basic rule that you need to follow. And it's pretty much a basic rule that everyone will sort of demand, I suppose, at a university a lot of the time. Then you write up your reference list using Harvard style. Then you upload your finished assignment to the assignment submission folder in Milo. Very easy. Because I like structure, I always like to give people a structure for assessment. You can see here that I've got the introduction. I've generally given you some points that you need to cover. I've also given you a couple of examples of those main points that you might cover. But this is just examples that I came up with out of my head. So don't stress about trying to meet this. It is just a working example so that helps you to think of the types of points that you might raise. Formulate and include a thesis statement summarising the outcome of your analysis in 1 to 2 sentences. So I've given an example. It is clear that my case study of an emergency aligned with the literature in 2 ways. First, the responders did well by providing counselling in the immediate aftermath of the emergency. And second, the recovery period was made difficult by how insurers defined this particular emergency. Again, this is just 2 ideas I reefed out of my head. You could focus on anything. All right, so don't stress about that. If you're worried about whether or not your points are going to be useful, just send me an email. I can have a look at your points that you've pulled out, and I can say, yes, that's a great idea, or no, you're on the wrong track. After you've put your introduction together, that's when you need to describe your reflective case study in further detail. What happened? Tell us about this in just 200 words. Then, how does your experience of this emergency align with the literature? And you need to again pull out those points, and they're the same points that I've noted in the introduction. The responders did well by providing counselling in the immediate aftermath of the emergency. 500 words. Explain your key point about what the responders did well. Explain what the research says about how responders did well. Explain what the research says about how the respondents might be able to improve this further. Whatever. How you do this is totally up to you. This is just a suggested structure. Again, the second point here on the second slide, how does your experience of this emergency align with the literature? Point 2. For example, the recovery period was made difficult by how insurers defined this particular emergency, which is the second point that I made in the introduction on the previous slide. Explain your key point about what the insurance definitions, how they made them things difficult. Explain what the research says about insurance definitions. Explain what the research says about how insurance definitions can improve. It's really totally up to you how you structure this. Again, this is 500 words, so you might find that you actually have 3 points that you want to make. So you cut this down into sort of 300 words per paragraph, 200 to 300 words per paragraph. It's entirely up to you. Again, you might find 4 points that you want to focus on. It's up to you. I'll just leave this up to you as to how you want to structure this and what you want to, the issues that you want to step through, and how much detail you want to go into. You might have one overall point that you're making about your example, your experience of your case study, for instance, but within that one point, there's 2 subpoints that you want to do. So you might want to do 2 paragraphs around those subpoints, again, bringing in the literature to support your ideas. Okay, then conclusion recommendation, pretty straightforward really. And references, excluding your word limits. We're using Harvard referencing. It's up on the website of the library site for you, and there's a link in the slides there for you as well. So, what does the criteria sheet say? I like to always walk through this because it's pretty important in terms of orienting people to what the things are that I expect to see. So number 1, demonstrate and apply introductory knowledge about emergency management practices and skills to demonstrate an understanding of the challenges faced by managing emergencies in the 21st century. So again, this is just from your perspective. You don't need to know a gazillion things about these management practices. It's just your perspective that said, I really didn't like the way this first responder dealt with me. They were being quite terse. And it's fair enough to say that, but then you need to go to research literature. What does the research literature say about, police officers being terse? Well, often in emergency situations, they'll be working through transactional modes of leadership, which means when they ask you to do something, you don't have a choice. You have to do it anyway. So, making links in with things like that can be really useful. So, as you can see here, I've got some general overarching criteria. Addressing the set task is very important. I know this sounds like a daft thing, but I have had students in the past who have, for instance, done a research assignment on ethical consent. It was specifically about consent in relation to research ethics, and they have interpreted consent as sexual consent and then submitted an assignment about that. So it's pretty important that I have something in there that says you need to address a set task. Second, you need to define your concepts. Please make sure you use scholarly literature to do this. Wikipedia is not scholarly. Other things online may be scholarly, but not Wikipedia. Don't use Wikipedia. So use your scholarly literature, use your readings, use the other stuff that you find in the databases to support what you're saying. So if your experience was an earthquake, go and find an example of a definition of an earthquake in a research literature journal article or book. Don't just put something together that says, well, an earthquake is when the ground moves. Actually think about it and have a good definition. You can see here I've also got something around content knowledge. Content about emergency management practices needs to be detailed, focused, in-depth. Now, again, it doesn't mean you have to have a gazillion points. It just means that, it just means that you need to have those very key points listed, and they need to be clear. It's not just a broad generalized discussion of how we need to provide psychological first aid in emergency situations. It is actually saying, I had a problem because I wasn't delivered psychological first aid in the first instance of the emergency. The research literature clearly demonstrates psych first aid is very, very important, particularly in relation to these types of emergencies. Such and such did research that said psych first aid really helped to improve overall well-being in the aftermath of an emergency. This demonstrates very well that clearly responders in this instance perhaps overlooked this element as an important thing to do. So content knowledge just needs to be focused on that stuff. I will know if it's too broad and generalized. If you're just talking about, what psychological first aid is, where it's applied, you're not actually bringing it back to the case study. That's how it needs to be relevant. Okay. So, demonstrate and apply introductory skills with critical thinking about and writing about the problems in a case study in emergency management. Clear, detailed links made between literature and issues in the emergency situation. So I need to be able to see that what you've thought about in terms of your emergency is linked here with what you've read. Okay, they are linked. If you're just saying, I found the fact that they didn't have psych first aid available in this emergency really problematic, and then you just blab on for ages about how you thought it needed to be done and the fact that you were really peeved off, whatever. That's not making any links with literature. You need to make those links. It's pretty straightforward. Analysis of issues in the emergency situation. Clear and detailed analysis of issues. So again, it's just about having those key points in those paragraphs as opposed to having just a broad discussion, some broader analysis of issues in the emergency situation. Broader discussion about what the issues are and describing them in detail is not going to get you that HD. Then there's the issues in the emergency situation are discussed but described rather than analysed. So again, this might be just a generalised brain dump about what the issue is that's come out of your head because you know about it and you've just put it on the page, but you haven't linked in the literature and demonstrated those connections between the two, which is what you need to do in order to analyse that material. Okay, our final part of the criteria sheet, which looks a little wonky on this slide because I struggled to get it to work, is communicate knowledge and research results related to the subject matter in the form of essays. This is very, very simple. Clear introduction and conclusion, clarity of expression, fluency of writing. All right, that's the first three that I've got in there. Then you'll notice on the next slide, I've got some other things. Appropriate format. So you're kind of following that overall structure that I've given you, suggested structure, but it's not hard and fast set in stone. You can work around that if you want to, but ultimately it looks like an essay, with introduction, conclusion, some nice subtitles for your different key points, right? That's what an essay looks like. If you don't know about that, please get online and learn a little bit more about it. I'm going to talk about it in a tick though. So you have to have the appropriate format. The number of references is very clear, 10 or more references to support idea, clear evidence of scholarly reading beyond the unit materials. All right, so keep that in mind. And Harvard referencing is consistently accurate. So hopefully that gives you a sense of what you need to do for your criteria. Now, I did want to include some points about how to structure an essay. So, because some of you may be sort of new to this area, others may have been writing for many years. It's really dependent on what your background is. So rather than take the risk, I thought I'd just quickly walk through it. So how do you structure an essay? First of all, you need your introduction. The way that I think about an introduction is this is where you say what you're going to say. You quite literally give a couple of topic sentences talking about the area overall. Then you say what you're going to focus on. Then you specifically outline in what I call a roadmap, giving the reader the main points that are going to be talked about in your essay overall. Provide a summary or roadmap of your essay. Keep it brief, but mention all the ideas. So the first point I will make will be, the second point I will argue will be, the third and final point will be, in conclusion, the essay will discuss, or will suggest, will contend, propose, whatever, really. Mention the recommendations there if you make any. That's what you need to do in your introduction. I'll give you an example in just a second. Then you need to move on to your body of your essay, of course. This is where you answer your question. Of course, you guys don't have a specific question. You have a task and you need to organise your points around that task. Show your knowledge and grasp the material you have read. Offer exposition, blah, blah, blah. Use relevant examples and authoritative quotes. Don't overuse quotes. It's one of my key points. If you overuse quotes, you're going to find that I'm not marking your work, that I'm marking the work of others. And it's very hard for me to pass you when more than 50% of your work is quotes. Sparingly. 1,500 words, no more than a couple at the most. All right? And keep them fairly brief. Often, quotes are great and you might get really excited about them, but you can actually find that you can write them better just using your own words and paraphrasing in your own words. So paraphrase means to, I might be, reading my piece of paper here, I've read it, I put it aside, I sit down, I don't look at it, and I give a summary. I give a summary of what I've just read. That's a paraphrase. You've still got to reference it, you've still got to put your Smith 2017 or whatever, but it doesn't require page numbers. Quotes require page numbers. So just make sure you're thinking about that as you're working through the body of your essay. But you need to have good, well-structured paragraphs in order to, put the body of the work together. And I'll talk about that in a moment as well. Use subheadings. It can be really useful for trying to navigate what you're saying, as well as helping the reader work through what you're talking about. And then we've got your conclusion, which is really, really simple. It's basically restating what you've already said. So you talk in your introduction, you say what you're going to say, in your body, where you say it, obviously, and then in your conclusion, where you say what you've said. Very, very simple rules, but really help you to define carefully about what you need to do. So you restate your overall thesis position, re-summarise your main points. Remember, you've summarised these already in the introduction. Just pull those out and reword them a bit and put them in your conclusion. Simple. Include a final broad statement about implications, future directions, some sort of conclusion. If you've got recommendations, you can put them in here. It's up to you. Don't introduce new information in a conclusion. So if you're bringing in some sort of quote to support your ideas, or perhaps yeah, sometimes that's useful if they're talking about those future considerations, definitely. But most of the time, if you're bringing in specific information in a conclusion, it means you haven't covered it somewhere else. So think very carefully about that when you're writing it up. Okay, just a quick overview of what a good paragraph looks like, what a good introduction looks like, and what a good conclusion looks like. So you can see here on this particular slide, I've got an example of a paragraph. Now, normally I would be able to write lines on the page and all of that sort of stuff, but I can't because I'm just recording this as a video. But you can see that there is a specific style of paragraph structure in this paragraph. Sorry, folks, I'm a little under the weather, so my neurons are not working as well as they should be today. So in the first couple of sentences here, we've got generally there are only a few officers who do not act appropriately and therefore need to have their actions altered. However, the difficulty lies in motivating these few police to strive to improve their performance. They are a couple of really great topic sentences. Fantastic way of overviewing your main point. Now, if you work towards a way of structuring paragraphs called peel, then you can see the first part of peel here. P stands for point, and your overall point or topic is in these two sentences at the top here. Then we've got what we call, the first point is the first sentence. Generally, there are only a few officers, etc., etc. Then we have elaboration, which is your second sentence. However, the difficulty lies in motivating those few police, blah, blah, blah. Then we need what we call evidence. So PEE, point, elaboration, evidence. Improving performance can be done by offering incentives, and we can see that Dean and Thorne has been cited here as a paraphrase. And then we've got some other points, and then we've got punch, then we've got Shabel, I think that's how you say it. I'm sorry, I'm so useless with that stuff. Et al. 2013. So that's your evidence. That's going to be the main part of your paragraph, all right, is to talking about how your reflective case study links back with the research literature that you've found. And you need to be able to, describe the literature just a little bit in order to make those links really nice and clear. And then we've got PEE, point, elaboration, evidence. Now we're moving to L, which is link. And right at the end here, from this we can see that citizen complaints are a useful tool to understand where corruption and a lack of accountability stem from. Fantastic point, linking back to the overall discussion in the essay, right? Then we've got another linking sentence which links to the next paragraph in the essay. Nonetheless, to be able to, the most effective method, there needs to be the other mechanisms used in conjunction with this method. That literally tells the reader what the next paragraph is going to be about. So this is how you set up your paragraphs to create what we call a vertical thread, which is an argument through your discussion in your essay. This is what I will be looking for when I'm looking at paragraph structure. This can be really difficult for some people who have been working in government for a long time or somewhere else where they're writing briefing notes or they're doing case notes or whatever, and they usually have very short paragraphs of just a couple of sentences. You've got to totally forget that style of writing and try and embrace this peel way of doing a writing. I thought I'd also give you a couple of examples of what an introduction looks like, or just one actually. Police are frontline, blah, 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 blah. On occasion, police actions do not reflect the ideals of policing. To resolve this, there are mechanisms. And then this person goes on to talk about the overall, roadmap. Sorry, it's working, it's getting there. The 4 different types of accountability methods will be discussed. Firstly, the impact of police reforms will be examined. This will be followed by blah, blah, blah. Then the role of the courts. Finally, judicial inquiries. It is hoped. So they've got a lovely couple of sentences here, which overall talk about the conclusion and further considerations into the future as well. So we've got our topic sentences or point sentences at the beginning. We've got our lovely roadmap in the middle. Then we've got our suggestions for the future. Okay, that's a good introduction. A good conclusion is very similar. Some nice little clarifying points at the top that overall summarise what the main topic and the purpose of the essay was. From the methods that were discussed, it's clear to see that there's no one method that is correct. And then they overview again, summarising their main points. And then they've got a nice little point at the end, which is talking about the future stuff. All right. So again, even then, we can see that sort of point elaboration evidence link. So our points are at the top. Our elaboration, there are a number of accountability measures. From the methods that were discussed, it's clear to see that no one method is correct method, and they're clearly summarising their overall main point there as well. Then there's a summary of your main points, which in this instance is your evidence. Then there's a linking point at the end, which goes back to your overall topic. Okay, so that is it. I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to get in touch. I'm more than happy to help at any time. I hope you have a wonderful day and a fantastic week, and I'll see you all soon. See ya!